So after finishing the New Avengers Incursions, I was sitting here thinking that that story was very, very dark. That story was very, I guess, gritty in terms of how it was done. It was basically about ending other universes. And then I thought, doing the House of M would be just as dark. So I figured, why not lighten up the tone? Why not make things more interesting by bringing to you guys the second part of the Deadpool trilogy, Deadpool Killustrated. Now, the reason why I say it's the second part is because there is a trilogy among the Deadpool series called Deadpool Trilogy. Of course, the first part was Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe. The second part is, of course, as we're going to discuss here, the Deadpool Killustrated. And the third part is Deadpool Kills Deadpool. Now, for those of you guys that didn't see our initial video or our initial series, Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, what we had found was that Deadpool's mind had been tampered with by Psycho Man. But all this had taken place in an alternate reality. And indeed, this trilogy doesn't tie into the main Earth 616 universe yet. It's really just standalone. It's just kind of out there by itself. But what Deadpool had realized when his mind had been tampered with was that Deadpool and other superheroes were the creation and the, concepts of various writers that were simply being manipulated for the purpose of what he perceived to be the writer's own desire for violence and things like that. And so, as Deadpool felt, it is not the role of anyone, as he perceives it, to be under the control of anybody else. And so, what he sees himself doing is effectively like freeing these superheroes. It's the best way I can describe it. It's his way of basically taking them away from being a slave to the writers and giving them freedom. And the only way he can really do that in terms of how he can rationalize it is to kill them. So, so what we do here as we pick up with Deadpool Killustrated is that we pick up with issue number 1 and we find ourselves going back to the multiverse. Now, as it stands right now, Deadpool is within the Baxter Building in one of the alternate realities, and he's simply using the Baxter Building as as a base of operations. And what we find is that Deadpool has been traversing the multiverse since the end of Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, issue number 4. And what he's been doing is killing countless versions of other superheroes, but the more he thinks about it, the more he believes this might be a futile effort. And so what he considers doing is killing himself. But what the voice, the psychotic voice of Deadpool in his head tells him is that if he did that, it may very well be possible that he's free of the control of these people who are creating him. And if he is, then he may just be able to rest. He may not have to worry about being revived. But if he's not, then in some way he's going to be brought back in. And this is the way that the Marvel Deadpool Illustrated writers are poking fun at the idea that when a character is popular, there will always be some method of bringing them back. They'll be cloned, or they'll simply just be revived outright, or there'll be some kind of story that's thrown in there haphazardly, that's kind of shoehorned in to tell us, well, this character wasn't really dead the whole time, or this is some other version of that character. And so what this voice in Deadpool's head tells him is the only way to truly win is to kill the source. But we don't exactly know what that means yet. But we find out what this means when we travel with Deadpool when he goes to meet various supervillains that he's basically kidnapped and forced into servitude. And it appears, as far as we can tell, the leader of this group of supervillains is the Mad Thinker, of course, one of the foremost enemies of the Fantastic Four. And what the Mad Thinker tells Deadpool is that they've discovered a pocket multiverse called the Ideaverse. And this is where basically all the literary classics are at. This is where Don Quixote, Moby Dick, Sleepy Hollow, this is where all those stories are from. And this is where the creators are drawing their inspiration for creating various superheroes. And so the rationale is that if Deadpool goes back and he kills all these characters before the creators can actually come into contact with them or can actually read about them, then there'll be no basis for these superheroes. And so by virtue of a paradox, these superheroes will simply cease to exist. Now, the possibility also exists that Deadpool will die in return, but as far as Deadpool is concerned, this isn't a major issue. But one of the things, I guess, that the Mad Thinker tells Deadpool is that because this is a multiverse, there are layers of realities on top of one another, and that if you were to go poking around and changing things, it could be like messing up a Jenga set in the sense that he could pull out the wrong piece and the whole thing could come toppling down. But again, this isn't something Deadpool is concerned about. And so what Deadpool does is he decides to undertake this role of trying to learn about the classics rather than going through and actually just killing everybody arbitrarily. And so what he does is he travels to the library, which of course he says is the one place he fears to go the most. And what he does in the library is he tries to read up on these various literary classics, but what he finds here is that he's just getting really, really bored. And so the only thing he can really do, as far as he's concerned, to ale his boredom is to simply just go through and just kill everybody, just to basically make it easy. And so what happens here is Deadpool travels back to the Baxter building and he begins talking with the Mad Thinker again. And again, what Deadpool has done here is he has basically taken the nexus of realities from the Florida Everglades, where he had previously traveled at the end of Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, and brings that to the Baxter building and basically creates a portal whereby he can travel through and then get to the Ideaverse. And so what happens here is he tells the supervillains that he's very proud of the work that they've done. He's very glad they've put their best effort or their best foot forward, and says that he's left them a parting gift. And so after he departs to leave for the Ideaverse, we find out from the Mad Thinker that the supervillains have actually been orchestrating a plan to eliminate Deadpool. Now, they don't know exactly where Deadpool will go. They don't know how long he will be there. He may be back in simple moments. They don't really know how time works in the Ideaverse. And so what they say is they have to work quick. But then we find out what the parting gift was that Deadpool had left them, which was a series of robots with razor blades for hands that go through and basically just start killing all the villains. And so that's the gift that he left them. And so what happens here is Deadpool lands in Spain in 1610. And what he does is he encounters Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Now, for those of you guys who never read about Don Quixote, this is hailed as a great literary classic. And this is what we're going to see in this story. We're going to see Deadpool encountering all these great literary classics and then basically killing the characters. And this is what he does. When he encounters Don Quixote initially runs Deadpool through with a spear, but he doesn't understand why Deadpool doesn't die. And so what Deadpool tells Don Quixote is that he has something in his eye and he uses his knife to get it out. But what he actually ends up doing is just gouging the eye out of Don Quixote. From here, he goes through and actually kills Don Quixote. And then when he comes across Sancho Panza, who has discovered the fact that Deadpool's killed Don Quixote, Deadpool simply just kills Sancho Panza without really worrying too much about who he is. And this is really kind of poking fun at the character of Sancho Panza. And the reason why is because when people think of Don Quixote, they know right off the bat who Don Quixote is. A guy who's disconnected with reality and can't really place himself in where he is at that particular point in time. But no one remembers the name of his sidekick. No one knows who his name is. In fact, I didn't. I actually thought it was Pancho, and I had to go look it up. But in any event, what we do from here is we travel to 1850. And what we find here is that Deadpool has basically killed Moby Dick. Now, initially, what we find is that the Pequod, the ship that's being captained by Captain Ahab, who is trying to find Moby Dick, comes across the corpse of Moby Dick. And what he's surprised here is the fact that somebody else has killed Moby Dick besides him. And so what happens is Deadpool cuts his way out of the top of Moby Dick, and then Captain Ahab has Deadpool brought on board. And so what he tells Deadpool is that he's extending his hospitality to him, and he wants to know why it is that Deadpool has killed Moby Dick. But before Deadpool starts answering any questions, he starts killing all the crew of the Pequod. Now, initially, he attempts to kill Captain Ahab, but what we find here is that before we get too much further with this, we jump to London in 1865, and what we find is that we're joining Sherlock Holmes. And the reason why is because the Mad Thinker has been able to code a message and send it to Sherlock Holmes in the Ideaverse. And what he basically does here is explain everything that Deadpool is doing, the idea that Deadpool believes that he's simply just some kind of puppet for the scheme of his creators, and that by going back and killing the various characters in this Ideaverse, that he can retroactively kill off all the superheroes that currently exist. And so what Sherlock Holmes does is he seems to take this information into account, but we actually won't find out until the end of this story what action he takes. And so what we do is we jump back to the Pequod, and what we find is that again, Deadpool is going through and killing all the crew members of the Pequod. But what he does after he's done with them is he sets his sights on Captain Ahab. And this is one of the interesting things, and this is going to be a theme that we see ongoing with regards to Deadpool Killustrated. What happens as Deadpool is getting ready to kill Captain Ahab is that Captain Ahab initially, or I guess for a split second, takes on the form of General Thunderbolt Ross in his human form, and then takes on the form of Red Hulk. And the reason why is because those characters, or I guess the character of General Thunderbolt Ross is in a lot of ways modeled after Captain Ahab, in the sense that the Incredible Hulk is the Moby Dick of General Thunderbolt Ross. And so what happens here is, before Deadpool is actually able to kill Captain Ahab, the Nautilus arrives. Of course, the ship that was very famed and piloted by Captain Nemo. And what happens here is the Nautilus seems to maybe rescue, or at the very least attempt to apprehend, Deadpool and Captain Ahab, and is using some sort of tentacles to grab the two of them. And so what happens is, before other tentacles can basically impale Deadpool and possibly destroy his physical body, Deadpool teleports away. And so what happens here, and one of my favorite moments actually in the entire Deadpool Killustrated story, is we switch to Missouri, to St. Petersburg, Missouri. And what we do here is we pick up with Tom Sawyer, but we don't actually see Tom Sawyer. All we see is that Tom Sawyer appears to be painting a fence, and he's going about, I guess, talking the way he did back in these stories during the Mark Twain novel. And he was talking about how he enjoys this kind of thing, and that it's not really a chore for him, but if it is a chore, then he'll do more of it. And then he takes notice of a man who's walking towards him, and he talks about how this man is dressed very strangely. And then suddenly we see a splash of blood on the fence. Indicating to us that Deadpool has just killed Tom Sawyer. And so from here, we jump from Tom Sawyer to Dracula. Now, Deadpool's initial encounter with Dracula, or at least as far as his information about Dracula is concerned, seems to be tied more into mainstream films. And so what he tells Dracula is that he's nothing like what he had seen in the movies, and he says it's no wonder why people like the idea of Edward Cullen as a vampire, as opposed to this actual Bram Stoker Dracula type of character. And so what he says is that he's 100% Team Jacob, which I disagree with. I'm 100% Team Edward. But the fact remains that what happens here is Dracula calls on his brides to attack Deadpool. And Deadpool, of course, is able to overpower these brides, and then he turns his sights on Dracula. Now, Dracula seems to turn into Doctor Strange here. In fact, I can't really think who else this would be besides Doctor Strange, unless maybe it's Morpheus or somebody like that. But what happens here is Deadpool basically kills them off panel. We don't actually see him killing any of them. What we see is that as Deadpool is traveling, continuing along this path and talking to the psychotic voice in his head, that he's decapitated all of them and seems to just throw their heads off the side of a cliff. And so what we do from here is we see that Deadpool appears to encounter a Ghost Rider. And this is really interesting to us because we know that, at least as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm aware anyway, there have been other versions of Ghost Rider, and so this may legitimately be an instance whereby he encounters Ghost Rider. But what happens here is that this Ghost Rider seems to be Johnny Blaze, and Johnny Blaze didn't exist at this particular point in time, which turns out to be in New York, in Sleepy Hollow. Of course, this in reality turns out to be the Headless Horseman, which of course again is the character that Ghost Rider is modeled after. And so what happens here is what's revealed, I guess, is that the Headless Horseman is actually Brahm, and of course we knew that this was Brahm. Of course, those of us who had read Sleepy Hollow knew that Brahm was the one who had scared Ichabod Crane away. And so what happens here is Brahm is taken by surprise by the fact that Deadpool turns out to be an actual villain, somebody that would really try to kill him. And so what Deadpool does is he taunts Brahm for a bit, and he asks Brahm if what he was wanting to be was really the Headless Horseman. And so what he does is he decapitates Brahm and then puts candles in his head and tells him that his wish has been granted. And so what we do is we transition back to London with Sherlock Holmes. And what we find here is that Sherlock Holmes has called a group together, and this group, of course, consists of Mulan, consists of Beowulf, and others, which are going to be a way for Sherlock Holmes to get this group together for the purpose of tracking down Deadpool and ultimately trying to defeat him. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. There you can keep up with all the updates from Comics Explained and talk to me directly.